This one is a nice, easy project, and it's ideal for the time of year if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, because it's a simple summer top, and I've sewn it on my Singer. Hooray, alliteration. This fabric's a slightly interesting find. It's not something I was looking for. It's definitely not something I would normally buy. I don't normally go in for prints like this, and I normally avoid yellow. It normally doesn't suit me. And the reason I picked it up was it was at my local charity shop. They had a bin of fabric out, and it was £1 per piece. So I ended up with, it must have been about 4 or 5 metres of fabric for about £5. The interesting thing is where it's from. Now bear in mind, I'm in the south of the UK, so I'm down in Kent. So, you don't expect to find stuff from Pangkor Laut that used to be at a luxury spa. So how do I know that that on the fabric tells me that? Well, the internet mainly. So you put Spa Village Pangkor Laut into the internet and it tells me it's a luxury spa. What's more, this particular fabric is actually on their website and you can see what they use it for, which is a body wrap. But yeah, that made me wonder, what is this fabric doing in the south of the UK? Is it a souvenir? Is it something that the hotel just basically says, well, we don't reuse it, it's always new stuff for guests, so you can take that with you? Or is it complimentary? Who knows? Anyway, all I know is I like the fabric. It was ideal for what I wanted. I wanted something very lightweight in a cotton or a linen, and I wanted something where it wasn't going to cost me too much if the idea went wrong. This is a prototype. So there's a few items I would like to tweak for future versions that I do, but they're minor, and it's more to do with what works for my particular body shape. You'll find the same thing if you give this a go yourself. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I do appreciate that. It helps the channel get seen. It gets the content out to more people that might enjoy it. Also, be sure to hit the like button. Same reason. It satisfies the algorithm, gets me seen. And of course, do leave a comment, especially if you found the video useful. I do these videos to help. I want to spread information and get people encouraged to have a go themselves. Sewing can be quite daunting, but you can start in surprising places and get things that are what you would like. With that said, I suppose into the video. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this one. Let's have a look at how to make this piece and how we're going to use this to make the back of this garment as well. Essentially we're starting with just 2 plain squares. This is quite a simple pattern to make. We're not worried too much about fit. We don't want it to be particularly snug. We want it nice and loose and flowing so that it's just going to let a lot of air around to keep us nice and cool. So what I've done to begin with is, using some scrap fabric, I cut 2 large squares of fabric out that are much wider than I am, and I played about with the sides until I got it in to about where I was comfortable on the width. You want it to be a few inches wider than your chest measurement actually is. The really good thing about this design as well is, because there's no shaping involved, like from the chest line down, this is a completely unisex garment. So no need to worry about darts or anything like that. The one thing you may need to change is you may need to make the body longer than I've done it here. So when you've laid out your square with your 2 pieces of fabric, what you can then do on the body is to figure out this angle. You sort of roll the top back along your shoulder towards your neck until you've got it the sort of width that you want, and then you just chop the corners off. I'm not explaining this very well, am I? Let me try again. This garment is very, very simple to make, and it's completely unisex. There's no shaping involved. It's a very loose, baggy, I suppose is the best way of describing it, garment, but that's what we want. We want something loose, very lightweight, to allow a lot of airflow around, which is going to keep us a lot cooler, which, given the weather we're having at the moment, is quite important. You want to begin with 2 squares. to get the fit I wanted on this, I didn't use this fabric, I used some just waste fabric effectively, and I made 2 squares. I then pinned it loosely along the sides and along the shoulder. Not all the way, of course, because your neck has to go in here. So if you put a couple of pins in sort of here, when you put the squares on your body, you can then roll this top edge back to the point that you want it, whether you want it very low on the shoulder or you want it very high up. I want kind of a drop shoulder on this. But to keep the shaping to a minimum, I'm not worrying about doing any special curves or anything on these seams. Keep it nice and simple. So you find out where you want this point to be in relation to your shoulder, and then you just cut a diagonal line down to where you take your chest measurement. For the front, it's just a straight cut down the front, and you want to work out again, when you've got squares on the body, where this point is in relation to your neck, as to how tight or how loose you want that. The split down the front will allow it to open up wide enough to get over your head. We'll come back to this in a minute. There's a reason I do it this way and I don't shape. So once you've got all those basics done, you then take this pattern that you've made and copy it onto your rear piece. Now this will be exactly the same outline, but what's different on the rear piece is there isn't the split and there's the scoop taken out. And the scoop is for the back of your neck. Now on some people this scoop will be very shallow, and on some people this scoop will be very deep. It depends on your particular body. And the only way to really figure out where this should be, especially if you're doing it on your own, is you put the rough 2 square garment on and then you just cut away a little bit at a time, if you haven't got somebody to help you, until you get a comfortable fit. I found for me that quite a shallow, wide curve is what I wanted, so that's what we have. That's basically your pattern. You can just sew along the sides and be done. I want to finish this off slightly nicer than that and just make it so it's a little bit more washing machine proof. So I'm going to take the pattern from these pieces into paper, and then I'll show you how to do a facing for this neck area, which will just, it's a little bit more work, but it will give you a slightly nicer finish on the end garment. So I've already marked out the fabric onto the paper, and that's just a case of tracing around it. I'm just going to mark that down with a proper pen line now. I'm also going to show you how to maximise your pattern material, because one other thing about this garment is it's mirrored side to side. So to save on materials, we're going to use this one piece to do the front and the back. Not sure how well that shows up on camera. I'll find out in editing. This pattern's mirrored, so left and right are identical. So rather than cutting out 2 big squares like this for your front and your back, all you do is take the fabric pieces, fold them in half. And then lay your fabric piece you folded in half on your paper pattern, and the only difference really between the front and the back and what you cut out is the neckline. So all we do is we trace out the neckline. Make sure on the front half you mark where the end of the slit for the front is. There you go. You now have a front pattern and a back pattern. All you have to remember is when you actually use these paper patterns on your fabric, is fold the fabric in half so that your fold line goes down here. So then when you cut this out, you'll end up with two perfect pieces. This is the front panel, this is the back panel. You can see the curve there of the back of the neck, and this is the piece that we have, which when it's done will fold back something like that. So your important pieces for the facing is you want to match this piece here, and you want to match the outline of your front. And we're doing this on the fold as well. And that gives us this piece. To make your sewing easier, if you follow just a sweeping curve, I'm just going to do this by hand. And when you come to the fold line, if you flatten it out just a bit, so you're closer to 90 degrees here, you end up with generally a nicer looking curve. And the reason for using a curve rather than straight lines is a curve is generally easier to sew. So when you actually make this piece, you'll cut it out on this fold line here. So you imagine this being one half of your pattern piece, and you'll have like a smiley face shape in the middle. You'll also cut down this slot here, so that when you put this on the garment, instead of having a raw edge at the collar, you'll have just a seam. This will be more obvious when I actually sew this together, so I'll go through how that's done afterwards, but this is how you make the pattern piece. There you go. Very simple pattern, fairly easy to make. I've already cut the two big pieces out of fabric. I need to do the facing. Once I've done that, I will show you how this all goes together. This is a very quick, very easy project, which is great because if you want to make something quick and easy that you can wear straight away, you can do this one basically in an evening if you've got a little bit of experience, definitely over a weekend if you're a new sewer. First step on sewing together the top is to deal with the facing. If you've got a serger or an overlocker, then the easiest way to do this one is just go all the way around the outside edge. I don't have access to a working one at the moment, so I'm doing the alternative, which is that I've just turned the edge of the fabric over the once. Not a very thick hem on there, it's just enough to put it on the inside. And I've pinned that, and I'll now top stitch that down all the way around the outside. You want to leave this curve here open and these two lines here open because you're going to be sewing that to the front of the shirt. So you just worry about this outside edge. Very quick and easy to go around that. And it just gives a nice tidy finish, keeps all of your raw edges on the inside. If you prefer, you can actually turn the hem over twice, but because it's a curve that can be a little bit tricky. It can go out of shape and be a bit awkward, so that's why I've chosen not to do that myself. I will give this a press just to take out this waviness that it's got. The next stage is to sew the shoulder seams. I'm going to be using French seams on this. You don't have to. You can, if you prefer, put your two pieces so that the garment is effectively inside out, and then just sew along the shoulder and sew along the side seam. You can leave these edges raw if you want. That's entirely up to you. I'm using French seams because they're a little bit stronger and they're a lot tidier. I just think they give a nice finish. If you have an overlocker, that makes it even easier because then you can get this, almost the strength of a French seam, and you can prevent any fraying by just sewing these seams along. That's not something I'm doing today. So for a French seam, you lay your two pattern pieces so that the right side's out as if you're going to wear the garment. And our shoulder seam stops around about here, because remember the front
is just the full width. There's no special shaping for the collar. That will happen when you actually wear the garment and it drapes. So you want to sew quite a wide seam here, and then I'll show you how the construction goes together on this seam, just to explain how the French seams work if you've not done them before. I've done both of the shoulder seams. Because this fabric's so busy you can't really see it apart from where there's a big change in the colour in the fabric, but the edge of the seam is about the width of a finger. That saves on metric and imperial, doesn't it? And it's just a normal seam, just a normal straight stitch seam like that. And what you need to decide is whether you want the bulk of this seam to be on the back or the front. I'm going to move it towards the back on this one. So for that we need to make sure that we cut down half of this seam allowance. And be careful when you do this that you don't catch the front. The reason for chopping down your seam allowance like that is you're folding this side over this piece and then down onto here. So you fold your longer side so it meets up with your stitch line, and then you lay it flat like that. And then you top stitch along there, and that gives you your French seam, which hides all the raw edges. It's nice and tidy, and it's usually the last thing to go on a garment, which is nice. And this fabric is a very crisp cotton, so it's lovely to work with. It goes where you want it to, and it's behaving exceptionally well. I'm really happy with it. The more of these seams that you do, the easier they get. It is better suited to very lightweight fabrics like this as well. If you try and do it in a heavier wool, it can make quite a bulky seam. And that's what you end up with. And it's nice and flat and smooth. And when you top stitch, you want to go as close to your folded edge as you can. And that means that there's the least chance of this actually unravelling on you. Because if you go too close to your first line, you might not catch your raw edges that you've folded in. On this machine, the foot I've got allows me to go very close to the edge. I can just swap which side this one is. And you want to try and keep your two lines of stitching as parallel as you can. Don't worry if it's a little bit wavy. It often is when you're doing it yourself and you've not done very many of them. And just take your time. This will take as long as it takes. And the important thing is, as long as you've got this edge down, then your seam should stay nice and strong. There's no need to go back on the edge of the seams because we're going to be catching all of these other edges with the facing and when we do the armhole seams. So you can just go straight along to the very end. And as you can see, that's a nice, smooth, flat seam. I'm not a professional when it comes to doing these evenly, but this one's actually turned out quite nicely. Once that's pressed, this kind of puffiness goes away and it actually flattens out really nicely. Now we do the facing, which, as you'll remember, is this piece. So before I sew these two together, I'm going to press this one and I'm going to press this seam I've just done. It will give a nicer finish. It is well worth doing. Pressed and ready to go. I did make one slight mistake on my pattern drafting. I'd forgotten to account for the French seam. So I've had to move the piece, it's pinned to the front, as it should be, and then the neckline here is just going to be a slightly larger neckline. Because of the nature of the fit on this garment, that's not going to matter. There's a couple of different ways you can actually fix this. I could have cut straight across here and seamed this piece, or I could have sewn this together, the two body pieces, and then drafted this piece afterwards. That probably would have been the more sensible option. Another thing to bear in mind if you want a very clean finish on the front is really this slit here. You should sew your facing on and then cut the slit afterwards, and then you'll get a much smarter finish at the bottom. I'm going to have to correct that bit as well. We all make mistakes. This is a self-draft, but these aren't serious mistakes. They're very easy to address, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. For now, I'm going to sew along these bits that need to be sewn, and we'll clip the corners, which is very important. Turn it out, press it, and we're nearly finished. This is a very simple, very quick garment. It's great. All sewn down, ready for the next stage. There's a couple of items that we do need to address. Now, pretend that this is done perfectly and I didn't make any mistakes at all. So your job then would just be to clip these corners. Don't go through your seam, just go close to it. This will mean when you turn out those points, you end up with a nice sharp point rather than a bulky blob. And then for the curve of the neck here, normally you would just snip along the curve up to the stitch line, but not through the stitch line. And again, it just helps ease everything round, makes everything lay flat. I've got to cut a bit extra off here because, well, I made a mistake. Mistakes happen. And I don't want all the extra fabric hiding in this seam. This is a very, very lightweight cotton, so you want to avoid things bulking up and showing through your layers. You can cut little triangles out if you prefer. I usually just use a straight line like this because I find it's perfectly adequate. So with that corrected, that means when you turn this to the inside, because this is your facing material, remember, you end up, I mean even without pressing, you just end up with a nice smooth curve on there. I've not decided if I'll top stitch this or not yet. It probably won't need it. I'm going to press it and see how it lies. The other problem, the other mistake I need to fix, again this is a mistake with my pattern drafting, is when you get to the bottom here, I've cut just a bit too much fabric, which is a little bit annoying. Now there's a number of different ways you can fix this, and I'm going to use maybe not the easiest way of doing it, but certainly one of the tidiest ones. Right. And that's what I mean with your point. That ends up being a nice crisp point rather than a bulky one. And when this is worn, the reason that I actually did the facing and spent a bit of time picking out some of the print that I actually liked as a contrast, this should fold back rather like a lapel, and then you'll see this little bit of contrast print, which I think will look quite smart. So the way I'm going to fix this at the bottom, so I'm going to turn this other one out. If you use scissors to turn out a point like that, be careful. You can very easily put the scissors straight through. You can just hand bind this edge here, just with some hand stitches. Or you can cut a triangle of fabric and sew that in from the back. Because this is such a short cut, I'm actually going to hand bind this one. I think it will be quicker, I'll have less visible seams to work with, and that's the easy way to do it in this instance. If you've gone a very long way, say I'd come down to about here, then cutting a triangle of fabric out and sewing it in from the back, it just means that you don't have this at risk of tearing any further. And I mean, equally, if you put it on the front, you can make it into a design feature. That's one of the key things. If you make mistakes in sewing, look for ways to fix it in a way that looks like you meant to do it. You'd be amazed how often you get away with that. This all pressed very nicely. I'm very pleased with that. I'm not going to do any top stitching. I don't think it needs it. I think we'll just leave it nice and plain like this. There are a couple of things I do need to address. As I've mentioned, there's a little bit of hand sewing here. I'm going to do this just like I do a buttonhole, so it'd be basically a blanket stitch just on this piece here. I also noticed, I don't normally do facings like this, you see, so I don't have much experience with them, but I've noticed this likes to pop out, and I can imagine that being quite annoying, so I'm going to tack that. I'll just put a tack in the bottom and wherever it relates to on the fabric. That'll stop that from happening. And because of the sharp corner here, I'm getting some oddness happening, which again, just one tack in each point, that will fix that. So all I'm doing here on the hand sewing is a very simple blanket stitch. So you go through, you make a loop, pass the needle through the loop and pull it tight, and it gives the appearance of a chain stitch along the edge. And the only reason I'm doing this is to just make sure that this cut doesn't go any further, and just give it a little bit of strength. This is, on this sort of design, this is one of the high stress points, because this is where it's wanting to tear every time you put it over your head. So this should help prevent that. That should stop that coming undone. I've already put my pins in where I need to tack. We'll go to the reverse of the garment. The shoulders are going to be fairly easy because I've got the big French seam here, so I can actually sew that one fairly easily. The centre back tack is a little bit trickier than the shoulder seams. I have less fabric to work with, and I don't want it to show through on the front if I can help it. So we start off by tying on, and we tie on to the lining, the facing, whatever you want to call this bit. And you just go through, make a loop, and then go back through the loop, and it works like a knot. And I've pinned the two layers in place to stop them moving away from one another. And you have to try to just pick up one side of the fabric, which is quite tricky. The camera's struggling with that. But it should be, when you catch a thread, as I've done there, don't pull it too tight because you risk breaking the thread. When you go to the outside, where the pin is there should be a stitch visible, and there isn't one. So it can be a little bit frustrating when you're first trying to do it, but be patient with yourself. A good sharp needle helps a lot. You want the finest one, you know, the finer the fabric, the finer the needle you use. So I'm using quite a tiny one here. Once you've got a couple of tacks in, that should be plenty. Remember, this bit's not under any stress, it's just to stop it flipping up out of the collar. As before, we go back through to bury the thread. And you can't see it. I'd show you where it is, but it's here. I might need to tack this down, I'm not sure yet. If need be, I'll put a little tack in here. But I think when it's on, it's going to stay put. I don't think it's going to do anything silly. But I won't know until I wear it. That's the problem with prototypes. Next bit of sewing on this is the side seam on both sides, and we're going to French seam this one as well, just like we did with the shoulders. And you have to do this before you do the armhole, the arm eye as it's also called, because you need to be able to tidy away your ends of your French seams. So if you do the arm eye first, you can't tidy it on the side seam and it ends up being a bit awkward. But if you do the French seams on the shoulder and the side, you can then nicely fold it all the way and you have a nice tidy finish. Now that I've got both sides all sewn together, the garment is looking very finished now, and there's not much to go. And it can be a little tricky to roll the side seams because, well, you don't want to pin through both layers of the fabric, you don't want to catch the wrong side. But on these older machines, you have a good sized leaf that goes in the end to support your fabric as you're sewing. It's also really, really good for this. If you feed the fabric on, it will keep the two layers, as it were, separate from one another, and it gives you a nice flat surface to actually pin onto. Sorry about some of the background noise you'll be hearing today. It is a scorcher, and this house does not like to let go of heat at all, so I keep forgetting to shut the door. As you get to the bottom edge here, you do want to try and make this as even as you can when you get to the very bottom, if you're just using the selvage as I am, because we're not going to be able to correct that with a hem. I'd quite like to keep the way the design looks on the edge, and there isn't a lot to work with to actually turn up for a hem anyway, so we'll just be careful. And there we go. And that board has just helped no end in making it easy to get all of this ready to sew. Last step is to do the armhole, and this is really very easy. You just fold it about that much, half a finger's width, and then fold it again and go all the way around. And you can either hand sew this from inside if you don't want any visible stitching at all on the outside. I'm not going to do that. Or you just top stitch the whole arm eye, which is what I'm going to do. It will make it a little bit more rigid, but I don't mind that. I think that will actually probably help the shape and the silhouette of the garment a bit more. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing this. It's getting quite hot, so I'm going to do that off camera so you don't have to listen to the fan and the air conditioning. There we go, that's the last of the seams done. Ready to put on, everything's all pressed. You can see top stitching here, and it helps hold the shape of the sleeves. Well, they're not sleeves because there aren't any sleeves, but it just helps hold this shape out a little bit. It will help it drape a bit better over the shoulder. I'm looking forward to being able to wear this while we've got this horrendously hot weather. It's a lovely lightweight cotton. Let's go to the reveal, I guess.